Good afternoon. I hope you continue to enjoy your lunch, and coffee will be out in a few minutes, but I want to thank you all for being here. My name's Mike Van Dusen. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Jane Harmon, the Center's President and CEO, regrets that she could not be here this afternoon to preside because she's a member of the CIA's Directors Advisory Board, and that group is meeting as we speak. The Wilson Center is the official national memorial to the United States' 28th President. We do two things. We convene meetings on public policy issues, and we welcome some 150 scholars from all over the world each year to do their own research and writing and take advantage of the opportunities in this town. Julia Payette is here today, and she is a former scholar of the Center. We loved having her here for several months. The Wilson Center promotes policy-relevant research and dialogue to increase understanding and be instrumental in enhancing the capabilities and knowledge of leaders, citizens, and institutions worldwide. Created by an act of Congress 44 years ago, the Center is a nonpartisan institution supported by public and private funds. The Wilson Center is very proud of the work of its Canada Institute. Now more than a decade old, the Canada Institute plays an important role in U.S.-Canadian ties, bringing Canadian voices and Canadian issues to Washington and providing for a free and open discussion of the critical issues in our bilateral relationship. We value the partnership and collaboration the Canada Institute has had with institutions, universities, and people in the province of Alberta on programs and conferences over many years. And we are deeply appreciative of the support the government of Alberta has provided the Canada Institute over the last 2 years. The Wilson Center and its Canada Institute are pleased to welcome the Honorable Alison Redford, the Premier of the Canadian province of Alberta. Alison Redford is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan's College of Law. She is now in her 6th month as Premier of Alberta. As a recently elected official, Premier Redford has an extraordinary number of exciting opportunities ahead of her, and we wish her well in her critical assignment. Premier Redford previously worked as a technical advisor on constitutional and legal reform issues in Africa for the European Union, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and both the Canadian and Australian governments. Premier Redford was appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations as one of the 4 international election commissioners to administer Afghanistan's first parliamentary elections in September 2005. She also served as an advisor to the Privy Council Office on Canada's future involvement in Afghanistan. After being elected a member of Alberta's Legislative Assembly, Premier Redford was elected as Premier of Alberta last October. Premier Redford has graciously agreed to take a few questions after her opening remarks. Madam Premier, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be back in Washington. As Michael said, thank you, first of all, for that introduction. I have been Premier for 6 months, and I have now been fortunate enough to be able to come to Washington twice during that time. And I must say that it's wonderful and a great privilege for me to be here. Thank you for hosting lunch. And of course, it's always a pleasure for me to be here with our ambassador, Gary Dewar, who just does such a wonderful job for all of us. And I have to say, on a personal note, as a former Premier, very often gives me some very helpful advice, and I appreciate that very much. I'm very mindful of the people that have stood at this podium and worked in this center, who have provided perspective on issues in the past, the present, and the future that will matter to our relationship. And it is a center that really is created as a living memorial to a very important man who spoke to a set of values that I think we share as citizens of North America. In 1918, before the armistice, President Wilson publicly declared that friendship is the only cement that will ever hold the world together. And as he spoke, a generation was making the ultimate sacrifice on battlefields in Europe. The confidence, the optimism, and the open borders of the pre-war era were gone, never to return, or that's what we thought at the time. Yet less than 50 years later, we could celebrate great success of those shared values with the establishment of the United Nations and a recommitment to the importance of internationalism and understanding that across borders we needed to support common values, friendships, and principles. Now, the challenges that we face as Western nations in the 21st century cannot bear a direct comparison to the First World War. But they do share a similarity with respect to the effect that they can have on our ideals. We came into this century, I believe, full of hope and certain that our way of life and our political and economic systems were the right ones. In the aftermath of a very difficult recession, from which some of us are now starting to recover, but others still are not, that assumption was weakened, and future projections could still be considered to be quite gloomy. The world needs more of everything: food, water, fuel, raw commodities. But the specters of climate change and environmental degradation overshadow our efforts to produce them. Scarcity and rising prices are spurring conflict, resource nationalism and state-led interference in the economy generating war, greed, and a great deal of international suspicion. And many are quite concerned about our prospects for the future. But the world needs to have a perspective of optimism and foresight to look beyond the premonitions of doom. It must remember that mutual respect, born of shared goals and ideals, will allow us to overcome our troubles. And in this regard, I would suggest that very little has changed in the past 94 years. Friendship is still the cement that will hold us together, no matter where we live. And I believe strongly that Alberta, my province, a province of less than 4 million people, has a critical role to play in keeping this true, now and for many years to come. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. In the oil sands, Alberta has the third largest proven reserves in the world. Now, this is an obvious boon for Albertans, but the same is true for our trading partners. The world is in the midst of a great transformation of energy systems, but this will not happen overnight. Economies will continue to rely on hydrocarbons, and they will rely on them for decades. And it's important that they get their energy from regions that produce it responsibly and treat the resultant revenues with care. Now, I would suggest that some of those suppliers are few and far between. Oil should be a blessing to the treasury of any country that's fortunate enough to possess substantial reserves. But the reverse has very often been the case, and some observers in some countries will speak of an oil curse, and with good reason. In many oil-producing nations, societies have failed to realize the benefits of their natural wealth or to produce them in a way that respects human rights and the environment. And in some cases, elites in those countries can be accused of using those revenues to further narrow agendas and to leave many people in those countries wanting. Now, earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time in developing countries on judicial reform, human rights, and governance work. And I witnessed some of that. And in many places, governments have not proven capable of rising above the demands of the moment or the lures of their own ideologies. They have not spent their energy money wisely to build community or to strengthen international partnerships. They have not thought about developing their resources responsibly for the long term. Poverty-stricken people and hard-pressed ecosystems have suffered the consequence. Alberta is a free, democratic, and oil-rich province. Sorry, Ambassador. Well, as is Canada. And we far outperform our competitors in every measure of fairness, good governance, transparency, and conservation. And as we expand production, this will only become truer. Alberta is committed to having a transparent and open conversation about the oil sands and the way that we produce energy. We have had success in the past, but we recognize that innovation will allow us to make further improvements, and we're prepared to be honest about the need. We are always striving to do better. Our role is to act as a stabilizing alternative, producing energy in a sustainable manner, promoting global energy security by increasing production to meet demand, and using revenues in a way that benefit the buyer and the seller. And in this latter area, we have a long track record of success. In fact, we return a lot to you. 90 cents of every dollar that the United States spends on Alberta's energy comes back in the form of Albertans purchasing U.S. goods. That's almost 3 times the rate for Middle Eastern oil. The oil sands positively impact this country in other ways, through contracts, jobs, and revenues for supporting industries. Among the states, our largest export market is actually Illinois. Our exports there averaged $18.3 billion between 2006 and 2010. And future oil sands development should add $1 to $2 billion to Illinois' economy on an annual basis and create or preserve as many as 19,000 jobs each year. If completed, Keystone will annually add $650 million and 6,500 jobs to those totals. Now, I was in Chicago last week to meet with industry and business, and there's excitement about those numbers. That makes a difference to economies that are still facing difficult times. Tomorrow I'll be in New York, and New York can expect similar benefits. Future oil sands development will add as much from $0.5 to $0.75 billion annually to the economy and create or preserve from 4,000 to 8,000 jobs. And even here in the District of Columbia, development of the oil sands will contribute an average of $28 to $53 million per year to the economy and create or preserve an average of 240 to 480 jobs on an annual basis to the year 2035. When Keystone XL is completed, and I'm optimistic that it will be, it will add an additional $20 million a year to the District of Columbia economy and create or preserve 200 jobs annually. And similar figures for states with a closer connection to Alberta's energy transport network run into the billions of dollars and the tens of thousands of jobs each year. And at home, I want to tell you that our government is spending those resources sensibly to build our community. One of our highest priorities is actually upgrading our own public services to cope with a fast-growing population and to provide Albertans with a high quality of life. So our relationship matters to us and to our communities. For instance, we need to have family physicians who can be accessible to Alberta families right across our province, which is a fairly diverse population. We are devoting resources, which are part of our economic relationship, to real solutions, to community-based clinics, to family care clinics, to ensuring that nurses and nurse practitioners are available for everyone in our community through a publicly funded healthcare system, so that people have access to primary care. We've invested in the same way with respect to our seniors communities. We believe it's important to have home care supports and to provide long-term care for many people in our province who otherwise couldn't afford it, and for those that can, to still ensure that they have support to publicly funded health care. That's a decision that we've made in our community, and our economic success allows us to invest in those values. We are still investing billions of dollars in infrastructure and redesigning our school system to produce competitive graduates for the 21st century that we hope will live in Alberta, but as I travel across the United States, I know that they're everywhere. And so this partnership brings us both benefits that support the values that we share. And I think it's one that will continue into the future to the benefit of everyone involved. Alberta has the will and the desire necessary to use its energy riches constructively on the global stage. And we're actively seeking new places to do so. So, for instance, through the Gateway Project to Canada's Pacific Coast, we're looking to access fast-growing Asian markets, which is essential for the long-term viability of the oil sands. And we're committed to working with our trading partners and our neighbors in Canada and the United States to achieve our export goals in a reasonable and a mutually acceptable manner. And this partnership accords with our shared values. With this in mind, I've been actively promoting the Canadian Energy Strategy, a Canadian energy strategy. Alberta is not the only energy-rich province in our country. Ontario, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Newfoundland have a wealth of resources that range from oil and gas to hydro. And we all face unavoidable truths. The infrastructure needed to get our energy to new markets must cross other jurisdictions. And the same applies to some extent to the environmental standards, monitoring, and best practices that will keep your country and our country beautiful and influence how much it costs to build and to maintain that infrastructure. And as part of this, we are embarking in Canada on a new dialogue with Aboriginal communities in Northern Alberta to ensure that they are active stakeholders in all future development. Through initiatives like the Aboriginal Economic Partnerships Program, which has invested almost $25 million to date in Aboriginal enterprise and economic initiatives, we will ensure that those communities can remain active participants and stakeholders as our economy flourishes. And if we can reach a broad consensus on ways of sustainably expanding production, compensating and benefiting those affected, and constructing infrastructure across each other's territory, all without compromising sovereignty over our respective countries, the benefits to the North American economy can run to the trillions. Now, obviously, a Canadian energy strategy will not cross international borders, but it does call for a greater collaboration in Canada between our federal government, which is opening up new markets and attracting other nations as customers. So in this regard, the strategy, in my mind, is not purely a Canadian endeavor. Countries interested in our energy must commit to building the end-stage infrastructure that's required to receive it. And since the vast majority of Canada's energy export network is directed toward the United States, it's only natural that we work together, and we will work very hard, to enhance a great friendship and to deepen our energy ties. If we in Canada can settle on such a strategy that achieves our goals, the United States will be able to look to us as a dependable energy supplier from a reliable ally, which is no small achievement in an uncertain world. However, security of supply is not all that there is to energy. It's important for us to talk about the global effects of climate change, which will increasingly make the social license that's needed to expand production and build new pipelines an issue that matters to citizens around the world and that has worldwide consequences. Alberta has no shortage of critics on the subject who insist that the environmental costs of the oil sands outweigh the economic gains. Opponents have been running systematic cross-border campaigns that build on a lot of myths and not a lot of science, in an effort to convince governments and society to bar further development and to try to shut down our energy industry on environmental grounds. Alberta must reframe the debate to focus on the environment, and we are. Going forward, this is a key part of our efforts to position the province on a global stage. We will ensure that other countries and citizens of other countries understand the issues that are at stake, and that Alberta is not satisfied with the status quo. We are working continuously to improve our systems. We have a transparent system. It's part of a system that can be part of a public discussion through information that's available in a number of initiatives that we've developed to ensure that we're having an open conversation with people that might be critical of what's going on. We believe that the facts are on our side, and I'll do everything that I can as Premier to make sure that those facts are presented and understood, and I'll listen to people that have real concerns about environmental outcomes. But I will say that the oil sands effects have been exaggerated. They do exist, and that means that Alberta must continue to improve its performance. It's not enough to play a numbers game. It's not a discussion about statistics. We have a responsibility to be progressive, forward-looking stewards of the environment. And it's an issue that Albertans are passionate about. We're not doing this simply because others think we should. We are proud of where we live. We have communities throughout the province that care about our future and environmental sustainability. And we will engage with industry, with stakeholders, on research, conservation, and in a transparent manner to ensure that we're reaching achievable outcomes. We recently opened the Oil Sands Information Portal, which is a continuously updated website that consolidates information from a wide variety of independent, scientifically credible sources on every aspect of the oil sands. Anyone can see the data and ask tough questions, any tough questions they want to, about what we're doing and how to produce energy responsibly. Alberta understands that partnerships and openness are necessary for improvement. We monitor air quality in regions in Alberta 365 days a year because we all live in communities in our own province. Oil sands water usage is stringently controlled. All existing and approved projects together take less than 1% of the Athabasca River's annual flow. And they're allotted a maximum of 3%. During low flow periods, we limit that to half. And energy firms themselves are working on ways to recycle the water that they use, with best practices reusing up to 90% of their water. And more work continues to be done through research. So, for instance, the Alberta government is engaged in a $15 million partnership with General Electric to find new ways to reduce industrial water use in the oil sands. And we're exploring the use of solvents, combustion biological processes, and electrical heating for in-situ recovery processes to reduce water use still further. More than 5 million acres of land in the oil sands, much of them boreal forest, are protected from development. By 2016, energy firms will be required to virtually eliminate all growth of fluid tailings. They've already had success with quick-drying methods that recycle most of the water used and speed up reclamation. Canadian Natural Resources has made progress in this area with the mature fine tailings technology, which produces dry, solid tailings that do not even include water. And this is a new development, and we're very excited about it. After 2016, companies will have to process tailings at the same rate that they are produced. This is an improvement over what we've done before. And we're also tackling emissions. Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to introduce mandatory greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for all large emitters. And our programs include a price on carbon, a regulated offset market, and a clean energy technology fund. So large emitters who breach their limits must pay into the fund at a rate of $15 per ton. To date, the fund has collected $257 million and invested $126 million in clean technology and research, supporting green solutions like geothermal energy, enhanced water recycling, and in-situ oil extraction, which doesn't produce tailings. Furthermore, between 2010 and 2014, total climate-friendly technology investment in Alberta will exceed $6 billion, more than the rest of Canada combined. And we believe that energy needs to be more than our conventional sources. We believe that we can create an energy economy that supports sustainable energy. We already have more than 800 megawatts of wind power, and our installed capacity is set to triple by 2020. All these ongoing efforts represent Alberta's move toward an integrated energy economy, one in which 30 to 40 years on, renewable and alternative sources will play just as big a role as oil does now. The world is changing, and we are changing with it. Sustainably producing the energy that the world needs and minimizing the effects of climate change are difficult. But Alberta is ready to assume its share of responsibility for both. Albertans want to do more than watch the profits roll in. As scarcity and need affect the strategic value of oil and gas, Albertans want to live up to the obligations that the energy riches that we're blessed to have impose on us. In the years ahead, some governments will give in to fear and greed, playing selfish games with basic commodities that we think the world needs to survive. I promise you that Alberta will not follow suit. We will do our utmost to use our energy as a stabilizing force to counteract the naysayers and the short-sighted people that may be criticizing what we're doing now. We will look to the future with confidence and optimism, and will partner with the United States and our other allies to overcome the obstacles ahead. Friendship is the only cement that will ever hold the world together. We believe that we have a role to play in Canada, in North America, and we will not forget it. Thank you.
I promised Premier Redford that I'd get her to the State Department on time. We have roughly 10 minutes for questions. So the floor is open. Identify yourself.
Hi.
Given that environmentalists want to target the oil sands, in their words, as the next Brazilian rainforest, do you see any opportunity to do what the forestry industry did in Canada, which is bring together some of the environmental groups and come out with an agreement that could be monitored by the groups and third parties and give confidence to both sides that you're doing everything you've said here that you want to do?
In fact, a lot of that work has already started. We, through the Government of Alberta, have a number of initiatives that are ongoing with environmental groups for exactly that reason, because we think that there are people that are quite concerned about environmental outcomes that are quite right to have those concerns. And we have those same concerns. So I do think it's possible for us to come together and to agree to some outcomes. What I will say, though, is we're not as far along, of course, as forestry was at the beginning. There is a different conversation that we still need to have, and I was saying at our table at lunch that the last time that I was here, a reporter told me they were speaking to an environmental group who said they were pleased with the delay on Keystone because it meant that North America would be off oil and gas in 2 years. Now, that is not a place where I think I'm going to be able to have a conversation with that particular group about what agreed outcomes could be. But there are certainly groups that have concerns that we can have those conversations with. We're beginning to have those conversations now. And in fact, I would say that even in Alberta, with respect to our forestry industry, that we have some people who have been tremendous leaders in looking to what those shared outcomes could be. I also want to talk about monitoring for a minute, though, because we've had some tremendous success in the last 3 months in partnership with the federal government in putting in place a joint monitoring process that will allow for independent scientific research to monitor cumulative effects of the environment, and again, post them as part of a transparent process. So to suggest that we might need to create another system to do more monitoring would probably not be as constructive as ensuring that the systems we are putting in place are providing accessible and transparent information to people. Thank you.
Way over in the corner, the lady in the last table.
Thank you so much. Scotty Greenwood, Canadian American Business Council. Thank you, Wilson Center, for doing this. Premier, to use a baseball analogy, I think you needed to come to Washington and score, maybe hit a solid ground ball to second, and I don't think you did that, and I don't think you got a home run. I think it was actually a grand slam. I think your speech was spectacular. Your message was exactly right. Continuous improvement. I'm really impressed.
Thank you. Can I tell you, last Friday, I actually took the first tour of Wrigley Field for the season.
Did you really? Awesome.
Yeah,
so you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, or as Ambassador Dewar likes to say, you really put the puck in the net.
There you go.
Right? He stick handles the relationship well done here. Anyway, what I wanted to ask you about is you called for a Canadian energy strategy, and that's pretty ambitious. I'm wondering if how realistic you think it is, and what would it take to get to a coherent Canadian energy strategy with everybody at the table? Thanks.
Well, it's a very exciting discussion because we've started to have it, and I'm certainly not the only person talking about it. There have been a lot of organizations in Canada that have talked about it. The ministers of energy spoke about it last summer. The fundamental premise has to be that we all understand as Canadians that all of these different sources of energy allow us to grow a stronger economy. And I think that's the first principle behind it. In talking to the federal government about it, with Minister Oliver and with the Prime Minister, I think that's the foundation that then lets us talk about what's in our national interest. So we're beginning to have that conversation because I think it's important, and it is tied slightly to the oil sands, is we have to have people not just understand but feel an emotional connection to the success of an energy economy. And so that's what we're talking about now. So it's just as important for me to talk about the success of the oil sands for Alberta as it is to say that in Ontario in the next 10 years, there will be $63 billion in investment going into manufacturing in Ontario as a result of the oil sands. And we see the same figures as I talked about in my speech with respect to Illinois and DC and New York. And so that's the conversation that we have to start to have so that we can talk about what our economic interests are. And that then allows us to come to agreement between provinces on particular projects that will help us all. Thank you.
Charles Duran at Johns Hopkins SAIS. I happen to think that the natural, I happen to think that the natural customer for your oil is the United States because of proximity. But there are people here who say, look, if we could just stop the pipelines, we in fact have saved the environment in some respects. But isn't it the case that you also have alternatives where you could sell the oil so that if the oil is sold someplace else, it isn't going to help us in terms of the environment here at all? We might as well be the ones who are buying it because we're your natural customers.
Well, our optimism is of course, because of the historic relationship that we have, that we certainly want the United States to be our natural customers. But we are an exporting nation. We have resources that we must export, and we will find ways to export those resources. There's no doubt that the Prime Minister is spending a great deal of time in Asia right now. That's certainly a focus for us. And we have the opportunity to export an awful lot of resources to Asia as well. It's not for, I think, even in terms of our business relationships, the most natural connection, but it's certainly an opportunity for us that we can't pass by. And you are right that I do believe at the end of the day that we are going to see these resources be used. So the question is who will use them and who will do it in the most responsible way possible.
Jeffrey Schott with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'd like to follow up on Charles's question. Too often in the debate about the oil sands, the alternative supplier argument has been used almost as a threat. When in reality, it's in the United States' interest that Canada produce the oil and ship it both to us and to Asia. And there is no
And we can do both.
Yeah, but there is no real viable opportunity to do so in the near term.
No.
And I wondered if you could give an appraisal, a realistic appraisal, given the regulatory hurdles that you are encountering in pursuing the pipeline to the west.
Yeah.
What a realistic timetable
Sure.
would be to open up the ability to access those markets.
Well, the first thing I would say is that my comments, I hope you don't take the comments of my speech as in any way a threat. I don't mean them that way. What I mean is that I think there's a lot of people in the United States that are engaging in a discussion about what they want energy to look like in the future, and a part of that is the environmental balance, but there is also the fact that if you're looking at how to actually monitor and have an impact on environmental outcomes, I would just suggest that in the regulatory regime that we have and our commitment to transparency and to open dialogue, that you are as likely, probably more likely, to have a government in Alberta responding to those comments in a way that's actually constructively improving environmental outcomes, and there might be other jurisdictions in the world where you're not going to find that to be the case. So that's my comment with respect to that. With respect to the regulatory process for Gateway, it's now in the National Energy Board phase, which should go for another 18 months. The decision is supposed to be made in April, less than 18 months, April 2013, which would then allow for construction to begin after that. So they're right now in rounds of hearings and seeing, I think, 4,000 interveners between now and then. And then we'll take time to, and each of these interveners is getting 10 minutes. So you can imagine that this is probably not the most lengthy and ponderous debate that we could be having about public policy. Nonetheless, I digress. The decision will be made sometime next spring if the National Energy Board panel believes that they have been able to obtain the information that they need to make the decision. And from that point on, it's my understanding that it just doesn't actually take that long to build pipelines. Now, there may be probably 2 years of work to be done. And the other piece of that is that there still has to be work done even once that is approved with respect to community engagement and making sure that people are supporting it as we go. So it may not be smooth sailing, but it's not a 10-year process. And there's a very acute awareness in Canada that we can't let, I would say, that we can't let this go the way of the Mackenzie Valley pipeline hearings that went on for so long that the whole thing just became a waste of time, essentially.
Let us all thank Premier Redford. Thank you for coming to the Wilson Center. You're always welcome here.
It was a privilege.